Hello, my name is Dave, and today we're going to be going over the installation of the Nemo Arms Recoil Reduction Bolt Carrier Group for your large frame AR. The Recoil Reduction Bolt Carrier Group is compatible with SR25, DPMS pattern LR308, and Armalite pattern AR10 rifles. It is not compatible with DPMS Gen 2 or POF Revolution receivers or any other rifle of a 308 AR type that utilizes a small frame or a proprietary bolt carrier group. You can learn more about the technology and see it in action online at nemoarms.com/technology. Before we go over installation, let's go over what's included and what you'll need to complete the installation. Inside the package, you will find Nemo's complete bolt carrier group stacked with premium features, including the Recoil Reduction Carrier Plunger System, high-pressure bolt and titanium firing pin with return spring, tool steel ejector and extractor with high-strength springs, one-piece gas ring, POF's roller cam pin, finished with a nickel-boron diamond-like carbon and chrome coatings, and a staked carrier key. Nemo's proprietary buffer with hardened nickel-boron coated impact face, mil-spec diameter buffer tube with indexing tabs, custom buffer retainer and spring, and a custom-tuned buffer spring. If you're using this with a new build or assembly, a castle nut and receiver end plate are not included. Also be sure to take time to read the instructions that are included with the Recoil Reduction Bolt Carrier Group for further information. Installation will require the removal of the castle nut, receiver extension or buffer tube, and end plate. And in order to do this, you will need some specialty tools. You will need an armorer's wrench for the castle nut, a torque wrench capable of tightening to 40 foot-pounds for the castle nut, a sturdy vise and lower receiver vise block. If your castle nut is staked, you may need a small punch and hammer to remove the displaced material. It is also highly recommended to check the headspace after installation using the appropriate caliber headspace gauges. Because we're working with things under spring pressure, a set of safety glasses is also recommended. If you determine that you do need to enlarge the gas port of your rifle, you will also need additional tools. You will need an upper receiver vise block, as well as the tools needed to remove your muzzle device, gas block, and handguard or rail. Because of the variety of handguards and rails on the market and all the different rifles on the market, you may have to check with the manufacturer of your handguard or rail or rifle to determine the proper tools needed. The first step when working with any firearm is to make sure that our work surface is clear of any ammunition and our firearm is unloaded. Make sure that your work surface does not have any ammunition or magazines, and remove a magazine if one is present. Now, lock the bolt back to the rear. Check the magwell, loading area, and chamber to verify that the firearm is unloaded. We can now return the bolt to the forward position. Separate the upper receiver from the lower receiver. Set the lower receiver aside, pull back slightly on the charging handle, remove the existing bolt carrier group, and we can set the upper receiver aside. Make sure that your vise block is snug in your vise. Now take the lower receiver and secure it onto the vise block. We can go ahead and put on our safety glasses and get to work. Once secured in the vise, we can remove the existing buffer and spring. Press in with the buffer, and then using a small punch, we can press down on the detent. Slowly remove the buffer and spring from the buffer tube. Remove the stock. Now you can use the armorer's wrench to loosen the castle nut. Move the end plate to the rear, but do not loosen or rotate the buffer tube. The buffer retainer is held under spring pressure. If we do not hold it in place while loosening and removing the tube, this could fly out, potentially causing injury and getting lost. Pressing down on the buffer retainer, we can now loosen the buffer tube. Turn it a couple of turns, and we can release the tension on the buffer retainer and spring and remove it from the receiver. Remove the buffer tube. Remove the end plate off of the buffer tube, and remove the castle nut from the buffer tube. We will need these for installation. Now select the new Nemo buffer tube and install the castle nut onto the tube, making sure that the 4 grooves are towards the back. Now take your end plate and make sure that the tab aligns with the groove on the bottom and install that onto the buffer tube. Make note that the protrusion of the end plate is facing forward as shown. Insert the buffer tube into the rear of the lower receiver, making sure that the threads are aligned, and begin to tighten slowly. Tighten the receiver extension until the edge of the receiver extension just approaches the hole for the buffer retainer in the lower receiver. Note that the machined flat shelf on the detent goes towards the rear. The buffer face will engage this surface. Insert the new buffer retainer and spring into the lower receiver, making sure to note that the tab aligns with the groove, and press down on the retainer, pressing it into the lower receiver. Now you can tighten the buffer tube approximately 1 to 2 more turns. If you find that it's difficult to press down on the retainer while turning, you can also use a small punch to press down, and then you can continue to tighten the buffer tube. Make sure that no edges of the buffer tube are protruding into or past the edge of the lower receiver. Slide the end plate forward and begin to snug the castle nut. Once the castle nut is snug, verify that the buffer tube is in alignment. We want to make sure that it's not canted either clockwise or counterclockwise when looking from the rear. We want the stock to be in alignment with the grip. Using your armorer's wrench and torque wrench set to 40 foot-pounds, you can apply the final torque to your castle nut. Make sure to stabilize the lower receiver to prevent flexing or damage. Verify that the buffer tube didn't rotate and become out of alignment when you applied your torque. You can now install the stock onto the buffer tube. Insert the buffer into the spring and give it a twist as you press downward to seat the spring against the buffer. Insert the spring and buffer into the buffer tube, moving it all the way to the back. You will press the buffer all the way into the tube so it is then retained by the buffer retainer. You can go ahead and test by pressing in and out to make sure that the buffer retainer retains the buffer as it should. We can now remove the lower receiver from the vise and set aside. Installation for the parts and components for the lower receiver is now complete. Now we're going to take the upper receiver and pull back slightly on the charging handle, about 2 inches. Now is a great time to take the lubricant of your choice and lubricate the bearing surfaces of the bolt carrier and the gas rings through the exhaust ports. Make sure the bolt is extended all the way forward. Now align the gas key to the charging handle while inserting the bolt carrier group into the upper receiver. You can now latch the charging handle and press the bolt carrier all the way forward into position. It is highly recommended to check the headspace whenever you install either a new barrel or new bolt. Using the appropriate sized headspace gauge for the caliber of your rifle, we want to make sure that it will chamber on a go gauge, but it will not chamber or close on a no-go gauge. If you find that it fails with the gauges, you may need to seek the assistance of a gunsmith or armorer for further technical support. You can now reassemble the upper receiver onto the lower receiver, and you can perform a function check. Once you've completed the function checks, installation is complete. We can now head to the range and test fire. The first test we're going to want to perform is to load 1 round into the magazine and load the rifle. Ideally, when we fire, the bolt will lock back on an empty magazine, indicating that we have sufficient gas pressure to lock the bolt back, making sure that the bolt carrier is cycling to its fullest potential. If the bolt does not lock back on an empty magazine, the bolt carrier may be short stroking, meaning not traveling its full path. We may need to open up the gas port on the barrel or open up the adjustable gas block if you have one on your rifle. If the bolt locks back on an empty magazine, we can now load a few rounds into the magazine and check the ejection pattern of the rifle. If the barrel was pointed forward at 12 o'clock, our ideal ejection pattern would be between 3 and 4 o'clock. Ideally, all of our rounds are being ejected in that nice 3 to 4 o'clock pattern consistently. If you find that the rounds are ejecting forward from that 12 to 3 o'clock position, you may have too much gas, and it might be necessary to turn down your adjustable gas block if one is present. If your rounds are ejecting between 4 and 6 o'clock, we may have to open up the gas port on the barrel or open up the adjustable gas block. If you find after installation that the rifle is not cycling as it should, you may have to check the size of the gas port on your barrel. Every barrel has a small gas port that directs gas up into the gas block, then down the tube, and into the bolt carrier group that cycles the rifle. There are recommended gas port sizes for optimal function. We'll now put a list on the screen of a chart of the common calibers, barrel lengths, and gas port sizes that are recommended for optimal performance. Feel free to check the materials that came with your product, or pause the video if you'd like to take notes. If you find that you need to open up the gas port, be sure to measure the gas port first. The proper way to measure the gas port is with a set of pin gauges. Using each pin gauge one at a time, you can measure the gas port by going in increments of 1/1000th of an inch. Once you have made the measurement, you can then decide if it is necessary to open your gas port by drilling. If drilling of the gas port is necessary, we highly recommend using a drill press or milling machine. Make sure that you secure the barrel firmly in a proper fixture to support drilling. Make sure you limit the depth of the drilling procedure so you do not damage the rifling inside the barrel. Using only number-sized drill bits to ensure the proper size, drill with the appropriate amount of cutting fluid. After drilling, check the gas port with the pin gauges again to verify that the gas port is the proper size. We hope you found this installation video helpful. If any part of the video doesn't make sense or you don't feel comfortable performing the installation, don't hesitate to seek the assistance of a qualified gunsmith or armorer to assist you. You can find more information and see the system in action online at nemoarms.com. Thank you very much for watching and have a great day.